if we really wanted to. But then also B, they weren't hardening to make sure the successor wasn't null. So it wasn't really the best code to kind of base an example off of. So we extended this to go ahead and handle that in one place, so that not every derived class had to inherit or had to implement its own if successor doesn't equal null, then do this default behavior, right? So what do we want to do if it is null? Maybe we should return here, right? So we'll say, we'll come in, we will change the game response, do whatever internal logic is required, pass to successor if set, and this will be redundant now, so we get rid of that. Otherwise, just return the game response. So there we have some pretty decent behavior. And go ahead and follow this pattern. So this is going to be the long-lost tertiary operator that we've been wanting to implement, the ham looking for a nail, for so long. If there is a successor set, then fire that. Otherwise, return game response. So, what this allows us to do is we've got this now baked in functionality, so you don't have to set a successor. So the last one to set a successor will be the end of the chain by default, and then it will return back the game response. This is going to save us a lot of null checking and a bunch of other little things. So we're happy this is here. Okay. Now, let's go into the hive mind. And we have this new login handler. And then we got we're casting this to be new. Would there be any danger in just making this a static class? It's going to choke on the base handler, which is unfortunate. But inside the base handler, the second wrinkle in the basic example is that it news up all of these concrete handlers, which can be a bit inefficient, right? So this is definitely what we find a lot in the design patterns, where they're great. Sometimes they're just really complicated, even in their most basic model form, like the way they're presented here. But then actually hit the rubber to the road. It's like, well, this doesn't really live up to like real world expectations. Paven asks, "Hey, are you making a game in pure C#?" We are, Paven. We are in the second semester now of the kind of series on design patterns. We're making a text-based adventure game, kind of a tribute to old school MUDs and such. So in the first semester, we learned a bunch of design patterns and made a very basic proof of concept. And in the second semester, we're just diving right into the meat of it, and we built a TCP server and client that can talk to each other. And now we're going through and seeing what are the best ways, or what design patterns can we use to handle the complexity that creates. So if you go back and watch the videos from the very first week on the factory pattern, we start off with a very, very simple like 2-class application, and then till now where we have, you know, quite a bit in there, and hopefully it's all well organized. Okay, so they want us to have a new handler for everything. So we're going to do that just to kind of see it. Let's create a new login handler. Let's create our new command handler. Let's create a new var finalize handler. But I do think we can do better than this. Simply because if we had 15, 20 different handlers, then this would start to be kind of cumbersome to do this all in a constructor. So mark a point there for refactor. But, so, from here, we're going to say that the request handler, the root here, the thing that's going to be kicking all this off, our very first handler, is going to be the login handler. And then we're going to set that request handler. The successor is going to be the command handler. Right? Which means up here, we should be doing this. The command handler dot set successor is going to be the finalize handler. So login handler dot set successor command handler dot set successor. We'll get rid of this stuff because it doesn't really make any sense. All right, so we instantiated our 3 new handlers for the chain of responsibility, and then we chain them together. So we say, hey, login handler, whenever you're done, I want you to call the command handler. Command handler, whenever you're done, I want you to call the finalize handler. And then we'll set that, hey, HiveMind, here is the very first handler I want you to use, which is the login handler. So let's come down here into our execute. Okay. So let's move this guy up here, because now the only thing the HiveMind is going to be responsible for doing inside of execute is going to be to start up a new game response, and then do request handler dot process request and then pass in the response. So let's change it up just a little bit. I'll just change out the process. And start off thinking we're going to pass in a bit more than we are. Okay, so now, and then we're going to take all this login stuff and put it in the login handler. And then we're going to take all of the this stuff, this command stuff, we're going to put in the command handler. Then we're going to take all of the finalize stuff, and we're going to stick it in the finalize handler. So all this code goes away. It goes where it's supposed to be. And then all that happens here is we need this one method to ensure that the game response is where it needs to be as far as structure, and then everything else gets passed over to the request handler. So we did say now it's only going to be 45 minutes, so I'm going to do 5 more minutes just to kind of get that in the right direction so that all this builds properly. And then tomorrow, we're actually stick all that stuff where it needs to go. So I'm already feeling really good about this 45-minute format. We're getting stuff done, making things happen. I think it looks good. So first thing we can do is we can say, hey, game response is equal to new game response. I'm going to change this back over to being a var, since we know what the right side, right? So as long as we've got clarity on the right side of the operator, it's pretty safe to use var. And then we can say response dot request is equal to request. This little screen squeeze says something that it wants me to use an object initializer, which I will in time. But it's always nice to kind of spell it out. All right, so we can get rid of this guy, and things are going to break. And get rid of this guy, right? And this is where all of our problems kind of came before, because we're trying to set these things here. Now that we've encapsulated this inside of the response, we can let whatever needs to unpack it handle all of its error checking and its null checking and all of that. We don't need to deal with any of that here. So we can get rid of all this, right? Anything we're doing here. And then inside of our login, really want this, right? We want that guy. Just going to take this out. Man, this might be a bigger refactor than we've got time for in 2 minutes. What? Okay. So, first thing we need to do is get that player object. So inside of the hive mind, we were doing something here to get the player, right? So we get room by player name. That's fine. Then we have, okay, here. So inside of the log, we got player equals get player by player name. Looking good so far. Let's get rid of that. All right, Fast and Furious over here. TM. We got this guy. We got this. So we kind of want to keep these two things someplace general. But just know that all these little special helper stuff we've got down here, that only helps with the handler stuff. We can take and we can put inside of our base handler. Let's make a region for that. So I'll import the types with paste to code. All right, so now I actually have access to these things. So I get player by name, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Nope. We're going to make that public.